Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Inner Fire Climbing Podcast, now brought to you with the sound of cute little birds in the background. I am in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and I didn't bring my studio mic with me, which was a bit of an oversight since I knew I would be recording at least one podcast while I was here. But the bonus for you guys is you get to enjoy the ambient sounds of someone's yard work and lots of little birds and squirrels and maybe the occasional Jake break on the highway. Been in Chattanooga for about 2 weeks and we're having a really good time, or at least as good of a time as you can have on a bouldering trip to a new area with questionable weather with a 4-month-old when you've never been a parent before. It is definitely a lot. Did I mention that I had to put my dog to sleep a couple weeks ago? Yeah, sometimes life is just like that. Everything kind of happens at once. So, but it's good. We're doing a lot of, exploring, and I think one of the most important things for me, and I don't want to speak for my wife, but I think she feels this way too. One of the most important things for us with this trip was just to feel like going on climbing trips is still an important part of our life, even though we have this big, complicated, beautiful and joyous, but also very complicated thing going on of having a baby. We wanted to feel like climbing is still a priority for us, and so we booked a trip. And it has been challenging. Anybody who's out there listening knows that having a 4-month-old baby is pretty hard, even if you're at home and you're both on leave, and I am not on leave, and we are not at home. So there's a lot of challenges. Lots of one person holding the baby while the other person furiously climbs everything within a 20-foot radius, and lots of putting the baby down for a nap and hoping that you'll have some time to try a project, and then she's wiggling around and waking up 15 minutes later. It's definitely a lot, but it's been rewarding too. It's just cool, obviously, to see her grow and change, and I got to hold her and show her holds and have her grab the holds because they're in front of her face, and she likes to grab things that are in front of her face, and she's not quite at the point that she's like visualizing yet. She's still mostly trying to pull herself closer to them so she can try to put them in her mouth. But I think she's gonna keep growing and expanding and get out of that phase and move into the phase where she actually climbs on the holds. So that's exciting. All right, enough of that. This is the February 2026 Ask Me Anything episode. So thank you, as always, to my patrons for submitting questions. And let's get into them. Okay, Cian asks, if you watched the Pro Climbing League, what do you think of it? How do you think it compares to the IFSC format for spectators and competitors? We just watched it a few days ago. I thought it was pretty cool. I think there's something similar in the finals of the Adidas Rockstars comp, which I'm not sure if that's retired now. I haven't seen one in a while. But I really liked the Rockstars comp back in the day. I think it was kind of more of a normal format for semifinals, and then the finals were like a dual style, the way that the PCL is. But the PCL, for those who haven't seen it, is it's all dual. So the climbers are paired off, and it's kind of a I forget what they call that style of competition, but people get eliminated through the competition, and so you're paired off with somebody, and then in the next round you're paired off with a different person until you're just down to one pair. And those people vie for first place. I think what I like about it is it's cool to have two people climbing on the same thing at the same time. There's a chaos and like a franticness and an energy to it that's really exciting. What I don't like about it is just that it becomes very speed oriented, which I think puts a lot of pressure on. It's sort of like what non-climbers think competitive climbing is just about being very, dramatic and quick. And I think that kind of leads to, it creates a lot of cool style, but it also leads to situations that are just not very fulfilling as a spectator. So, and I guess I'm going to enter the spoilers phase, so you can skip to the next question if you plan on watching the PCL. But I want to say it was Mejdi, and it was the first round. It was whoever was Mejdi was paired up with. They both grabbed the finish hold basically at the exact same time on their first go. So they both flashed the boulder, and the judge's review was Mejdi was 0.0001 second faster than the other person. And that's just kind of unsatisfying as a spectator, at least for me. And then the other thing that I found unsatisfying was in the end, I felt like Colin was climbing better on the final boulder. And I think Max Millen is an incredible comp climber. I'm not taking anything away from him. But I thought Colin was trying to do the intended sequence, and he was really, really close to sticking it. And Max found a skip and committed to the skip and bled all over the boulder to do it, which I think is, kind of cool in a way. But neither of them did it, and actually Max's beta led him to be out of sequence, and he couldn't finish from the way that he had broken it. I think he would have needed even more time to figure out how to make his skip actually get to the finish of the boulder. And I just I don't know. It was a lackluster finish for me. I felt like Colin was the better climber in that final round. I'm not going to say that he got robbed or anything, because there's value in breaking the boulders, but in the IFSC, breaking the boulder would only help you if you could get to the top. And in this case, Max just had to get one hold further than Colin. And I don't know, I just thought that was kind of lame. Like, if you have a skip, but it doesn't get you to the top of the boulder within the time window, have you really done better than the other climber who got to the same point as you, but is, climbing in a way that actually they could actually finish? I'm not sure. I feel pretty mixed about it. And also, throughout the rest of the competition, both Colin and Max were incredible. I think they're both very well suited to that style of comp, and so I think it would have been cool if it had been more of a head-to-head where they're actually trying to do the move, and maybe one of them had stuck it, at the end. But it just turned out that it wasn't like that. I don't know. I hope it was fun for the people who were watching in person, and I hope that the people who put it on kind of got out of it what they wanted, but I felt a little bit let down by the final. Yeah, so I mean, that is one downside, is it puts more, because it's built up over all these rounds, it puts even more pressure on the final duel to be really exciting, and that boulder has to be perfect, and you only have 2 chances for it to be climbed. Whereas in the IFSC format, there's less of a climax, but also there's less of an opportunity for a letdown, because the excitement is distributed over this much longer time span. And personally, I don't know if I've said this on the pod before, but when I watch the IFSC, I think semifinals is the most exciting round for my money. I would way rather watch a well-produced semifinal round than watch a finals round, as long as the camera team and the producer are really good and they're actually following the action where it's happening. Because semifinals is it's so exciting when there's lots of good people climbing and the boulders are really good. It's just nonstop action in kind of the third quarter and fourth quarter of the semifinals round, and I find that so fun to watch. When the camera production is bad, semifinals is awful. So it really does depend a lot on the production team. Okay, thanks for the question, Cian. Sam asks, hey Jesse, I remember about a year ago you were asking for recommendations for a guest to come on the podcast to discuss ethics. I was curious if anything ever came of that, whether it be an episode or even a short series exploring ethics across different parts of the sport, from developing climbs and sensitive access areas all the way down to getting into outdoors for the first time and how to treat rock. I went back through the podcast feed and didn't see one, so if I missed it, please let me know. I would find this episode or series an enjoyable listen. Thanks as always for everything you do. Thanks, Sam. Well, I did talk a little bit about developing with Eric Jerome, and I think I'll be having Chris Schulte on pretty soon. Ethics is something I'm interested in, so I always want to have people on to talk about that kind of stuff. And this is also why I did my rules episode, my solo episode, quite a while ago. I have some more things in that vein kind of brewing, but what I want to avoid is just doing an episode where I'm dropping, the 10 commandments and I'm just laying down all these what you should do kind of things. I think it's always open for interpretation, and so I want it to be a continuing thing where I just keep having people on and talking about these topics. So I think there's no such thing as a climbing ethicist. If that person exists, if that job exists, then I'd love to know about it. And if people have a suggestion for who I could have on that would be good to talk to about this, I'd love to hear it. I got some okay suggestions when I posted about that, a year ago or whatever. But maybe nobody that I felt comfortable just cold calling. So yeah. And part of the reason I didn't get into it further with Eric was he had just been on some other podcasts and talked about the whole outdoor ethics thing, because he works for Kaya, and he and I just really didn't get into Kaya very much, because he had just done some other podcast where he talked about that kind of at length. So it felt like it would be a little repetitive to get into that stuff on my show as well. But yeah, if people have any good ideas, I'm definitely open to it. And if you are a climbing ethicist, then please reach out. I'd love to have you on the show. Thanks, Sam. Anthony asks, hi, Jesse. What do you think makes outdoor climbing so much more fun than indoor climbing? I used to think the permanence of the rock was the critical difference, but I've been trying to start the season by climbing lots of mods instead of getting sucked into projects like usual, and the pure movement has been way more fun than I anticipated. General thoughts on the differences in experience between indoors and outdoors would be greatly appreciated. Thank you, and I hope you have a great week. Thanks, Anthony. I hope you have a great week too. I like being outside. That's probably the easiest answer to this question. I would just rather be outside than in the gym, which I'm very lucky, and I'm super grateful that climbing taught me that, because up until I started climbing, I spent the vast majority of my time inside. I had been a Boy Scout, and I had gone camping when I was a kid and things like that, but I didn't love those things as a kid. I hadn't developed a real appreciation for them necessarily, and climbing was one of the first things where I really got to enjoy the outdoors and experience them. And I just think humans are different and better people outside, and I think the further away from civilization and the further away from the kind of manicured experience that you get, the better that is and the more true it is. Like, my climbing experiences have been much more raw and real, and they're much more memorable when they're far from the road and climbing on something maybe I've never heard of or nobody else has ever climbed. Those have been much more powerful experiences to me, and kind of the closer I am to a city or to a population center or to the road, or like the more well-traveled the climb is, it's almost like harder for me to have that kind of magical experience on it. It's hard to capture in words exactly why that is, but it's something that I felt really strongly over my climbing career, and at this point, it's just a bare truth for me. There's no getting away from it. I just like being out there. Maybe there's something to be said about like all the benefits of being outside, all the neurochemical benefits, but I think it's more magical than that. I think there's more to it than that. And I think you make a good point that climbs outside have a little bit more permanence, or a little bit more like lasting kind of definition to them. I think that's also why we've seen the rise of the board culture, because boards have this sort of facsimile of permanence, like there's obviously more than one board, so they're not a singular, but if you climb a problem on a board, there's something you can say you've done that is sort of unchanging and is a known quantity, whereas if you climb a cool problem in your gym, you just had a cool experience, and it's not something anyone can relate to unless they climb at your gym at that exact same time and they climb the same grade as you, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I think the purpose that outdoor climbing serves in my life and the purpose that gym climbing serves are kind of different. So as much as I just extolled all the virtues of climbing outside, there is still a lot of value in gyms for me. Obviously, they're pretty good for training just because of the density, and they're also a really good third space. Like, you meet people, you engage with the climbing community in a way that you just don't when you climb outside, especially if you like that solace that I was talking about earlier. And I guess if you like my performance, progression, fulfillment kind of model of like what people try to get out of climbing gyms for me are a lot more about fulfillment. I mostly am trying to enjoy movement, climb on some new holds, see new things, and like talk to people. Those are all important things about the gym experience to me, whereas when I climb outside, I'm much more interested in performance most of the time, with some exceptions. Like right now I'm in chat, and I'm definitely at least telling myself that this is more about fulfillment, because if I'm here for progression, I'm not doing a very good job at this point. But so it goes. And good for you starting the season by climbing lots of mods. I think that's the best way, honestly, to start a season, and I think it just makes you a better climber. Getting sucked into projects should be a once in a while thing, in my opinion. All right, thanks for the question. Oh, sorry, Anthony had a small second question. If I've been to Yosemite for bouldering, any recommendations for how to prepare? Well, Anthony, the last time I went to Yosemite was 2010. I'd been climbing for 3 years, and I literally dropped out of college, put all my stuff in my Dodge Neon, and drove to Yosemite without even checking the weather. It was March. And I got over the passes and I got into Yosemite in my little roller skate car, and I climbed there. But I would not say that I was well prepared. And I haven't been back, so I'm just not the right person to ask this question. But man, I would love to go there, and I'm so happy to see that it's having a resurgence because it seems epic. So definitely go if you can. That's my recommendation. Thanks for the questions. Okay, Kyle asks, have you ever punted a proj? And if so, what was the mental reset process like for you? Well, Kyle, I think you know I'm not a fan of the word punt. I just don't really think about it that way anymore. And maybe that's the reason, but I just don't really think that I've punted a project in a really long time. I guess it's going to depend on your definition, but I'm just sort of a believer that it ain't over until it's over. Like, if you got close to the top and you fell, that doesn't mean that you did something wrong necessarily. You might have. Doesn't mean that you punted. Doesn't mean that you were robbed or anything like that. You just haven't done it yet. You haven't finished it yet. You're still in the process. And it's this attachment to the outcome that is creating the disconnect there. It's this attachment that's creating the suffering. So I think the more you can separate your climbing experience from that attachment to the outcome, then first of all, the less you're going to suffer. But also I think you'll be more in the flow and more in the process, and you won't be thinking about punting. Like, I love when I see people fall near the top or like slip off the top out or something, and they're happy about it because they know they had a really good try. I think that's the attitude that you want to capture more than the attitude of being like frustrated that you're not done, that it's not over with. I think wanting to get it over with is probably not the attitude that you want to bring into a limit project, because it shows a lack of curiosity for what is going to happen. It's this ego and this expectation of that you have total control and that you're going to get what you want out of it. And I just don't think that's a very productive way to go about putting yourself under pressure to do one of the hardest things that you'll ever do in your life. If you're really truly climbing at your limit, what you're talking about doing is like having one of the most physically and mentally and emotionally challenging experiences that you're going to have in your whole life. And you're going to go into that experience like very expectant that it's going to go well. I just think that's setting yourself up for failure. I think one thing that was really handy for me with my mindset about this is I used to climb at a sport crag in Portland called the Rat Cave. And it's like a grid bolted choss pile. I'm not being disparaging there. It's genuinely choss pile. And a lot of the routes kind of end where the cave peters out and turns back into vert. It's very vegetated. And so the bolts for the anchors are in the last vestiges of good rock before it turns to vegetated crap at the top. You know, the slightly less chossy rock that's a few feet lower. And a lot of the time the holds kind of end before the anchors. So just a lot of the routes there, you're literally clipping the chains on the route up above your head off of some bad undercling and like pulling up an armload of slack at the top of the pitch and clipping like 3 feet above your head. And obviously that's really, really hard. But because it's grid bolted, you learn all the finishes and then you project the different starts and then you do all the different variations to the routes. You know, there's everything from like 12, mid 512 that goes to the top of the wall up to like 14A, 14B. And so you kind of just learn all these starts and finishes and then get them dialed. And the funny thing is, like, you'll be projecting the 12C and you'll fall clipping the chains, 10 times and you'll be really frustrated. But then 2 or 3 years later, you're projecting like a 13C that ends on that exact same clip. And by then you've fallen clipping the chains on that ending so many times that you realize it's just not over until you clip those chains. And people had a very good attitude at the time I was climbing there. I was climbing with a fantastic little community of mostly older climbers, actually, like men and women in their 50s and early 60s who were so inspiring to me at the time. And we would just all meet out there with our lawn chairs in the shitty weather because it's really steep and we would hang out and eat snacks and fall off the top of our climbs. And there was celebration when people sent and clipped the chains, but there was also a lot of celebration when people fell with an armload of slack out trying to get that rope into the anchor. And I think that was really positive for my attitude to just be like, oh, well, I went to the crag today. I'm super tired. I beat the crap out of myself, and I got 3 good fitness burns where I had the rope in my hands and I just couldn't get it into the anchor. That was really, really positive for me. And obviously not every route is like that, but I think if you can have those experiences and you can walk away from them feeling like you gained something from it, it's going to help mold you into the type of climber who's more resistant to that ego and more resistant to that frustration or that sense of feeling like you want to get it over with, if that makes sense. All right, Rask asks, this is a long one. Hi, Jesse. Love the podcast and your content in general. Thanks, Rask. I just moved to the countryside, far away from gyms and further away from rock, so I built a home wall in the basement. It's an 8x8 wall, currently at 40 degrees, but adjustable if I want to. My question is basically how to get the most out of this training tool since it's a fairly small space. Context, I've been climbing for 10 plus years, mostly bouldering, around V1011. I'm 6'2", I guess 6'2", and my style is crimpy and powerful. I've implemented several good habits in my training: climbing with intention, training towards a goal, body movement awareness, and being analytical about improvement, and I've seen big improvement through this. My goal is to improve more at bouldering, climb mostly on granite, focusing even more on body tension / footwork, and moving in weird boxes, such as high feet on an overhang that keep peeling off. I have access to a fitness gym nearby and go 3 to 4 times a month to a very good climbing gym, biggest spray wall ever, plus Seco block and big lead facilities, where I can complement my training with capacity or endurance sessions. I make my own wooden climbing holds, and I'm still gradually filling out the wall with holds. How do I make the best of this training tool with limited space? Would love to hear your thoughts. Thanks a lot. Well, Rask, I gotta be honest, sounds like you already are making pretty good use out of your training time and training space, so props to you. I don't know what your experience is with having a home wall, but probably the biggest thing you could do to improve kind of how much you can leverage that home wall tool would be to get better at setting on it. I think when I climb with other people on their home walls and when other people come over and use my home wall, the biggest thing that really stands out to me is my experience as a route setter is just very apparent in the way that I engage with spray walls and the way that I engage with my own home wall, like in terms of how I built it and how I set the holds up and stuff. And obviously you can't just run out and get experience as a commercial route setter, but I can tell you, like, the better you get at setting, and I mean both putting holds on the wall and determining where they go, but also creating paths, creating like actual routes on the wall. The better you get at those two skills, the more you're going to be able to leverage your home wall, and the more you try to use it as a training tool just as a climber without thinking about the setting aspect, the more it's going to feel foreign to you, and it's going to feel like a very physical endeavor to climb on it. So like if you know that high feet on the overhang keep peeling off, then you can create a lot of challenges, both with the way you set the holds up and also the way you create routes on the wall to sort of work on that skill. That'd be a great example of a skill that you can just hammer on a home wall in a way that you actually kind of can't on a commercial board or on a commercial gym set. Like you can sort of force it into those boxes, but with a home wall you have total control over the environment, so it just makes it a lot easier to practice something specific like that. I'm not sure if you have other people in your area who come climb on it, but I think having people climb on your wall and help set problems for you and try your problems so you can get feedback, seeing the way that people break your problems is really, really valuable. I had an opportunity to have a super strong climber come over and climb on my board a couple weeks ago, and it was just cool to see how, he just had such stronger fingers and power than me, and was a lot more experienced on a board, and the way that he was able to just break things down and not use my footholds and just like power through things was quite eye-opening. And like, I know those people exist, but it's just different to see someone do that on your board. And it's inspiring also to just be like, okay, if he could do it that way, I might as well go in and edit the problem and take those footholds off, because I can figure out how to do it that way too. And maybe this is more of a minor thing, but I think if you're really interested in granite climbing, it depends on your style of granite. If you're thinking like little cottonwood style granite, then you probably just want a lot of really ratty crimps on your board, and that's going to do it. But if you're thinking, Leavenworth style or like Northwest style granite, where there's lots of heel hooks and trickery, you're going to need some bigger holds, and maybe I would even build some little volumes to create some 3D space on your wall. The problem with volumes is that 3D space gets monotonous really fast because it creates terrain, and terrain drives skills more than holds do. So when you have that 3D space, it's going to allow you to practice new skills that you can't on a flat board, but it's also going to make that section very monotonous because the skills are all going to come from the terrain instead of what holds you have on it. And on an 8x8 wall, it's not that big, so it's going to get monotonous quite fast. So if you were going to do that, if you were going to make some 3D space, you would want to turn it over pretty frequently. I'm not sure if you've seen my board, but the wings that I put on the sides, part of the reason I really like the wings idea is it allows me to have that 3D-ness, do all those heel hooks and toe hooks without creating monotony in the center of the board. So I could keep the center of the board very flush and plain without having volumes on it, and I can still have some of that 3D space. So if you have room on the sides, you could consider doing something like that. And even just putting little screw-in holds on the sides of the board is quite valuable for heel hooking and toe hooking, in my opinion. So if you have that type of granite, that is one concrete thing that I would recommend. Other than that, sounds like you're doing a lot of the right stuff. So yeah, I mean, if you want a training plan, I sell those. But if you just want general advice, that's the best I could do. Thanks for the question. Okay, question from Jake. Jake asks, hey Jesse, question on limit bouldering tactics. Right now I am projecting Chutzpah. It consists of about 10 hand moves, all of which feel extremely dialed and repeatable on command, except the first move. The first move consists of squeezing a river-polished pinch with the left hand, locking off on it, and making a big right hand move up. This move is very left arm intensive, and I can feel my left arm getting tired 1 to 2 hours into trying the move, whereas the rest of my body still feels fresh. How do you go about these situations when projecting where the biggest limiting factor itself is isolated fatigue? Any tips for managing this during the projecting session itself? Well, the biggest limiting factor for projecting is pretty much always isolated fatigue. As the problems get harder, this becomes even more of a reality. And I think it pretty much always becomes the fingers at a certain point, but sometimes there are body aspects that get tired really, really fast. So like some that stick out really plainly to me, just because they're weak areas for me, would be things that are really twisty, or like when I have a super, super high far foot in a steep wall, my QLs, like my lower back muscles and my obliques will get tired really fast, and I could just only do super strenuous moves like that a few times. And then the one that drives me crazy is my tib ants. So anybody who has done a lot of toe hook boulders knows that those muscles in the front of your calf, it's just not a very big muscle, the one that controls plantar flexion, and once it fatigues for the day, you're kind of cooked. So there's been problems where I unlock it and I think I'm going to send it, and then boop, I just can't toe hook anymore. That's very trainable, and when I'm doing a lot of toe hook boulders, I will train those things up. Something more basic like your arm getting tired is kind of hard to deal with, because those are much bigger muscles, and they're muscles that we train quite frequently, and so they're going to have a higher general capacity. But this is normal. This is part of projecting, and probably my biggest piece of advice here would be to spread out what you're trying in a given day. Like if you're driving out to the crag just to try this boulder and it's the only thing that you have in your mind, well then yeah, your session's going to feel short and it's going to feel frustrating, because you're going to have a lot more juice in the rest of your body, but the one thing you need to do this boulder is going to be cooked. I think this is why I'm such a big advocate of, when you climb moderates, getting really into that 3 to 5 try sort of limit mentality, because it teaches you how to go about trying really hard projects with the 3 to 5 try limit mentality. Like when I'm trying V12s and V13s, if they're really comfortable, like Hagakure, I could try quite a few times in a day, but when I was trying like drawn and quartered, for instance, I could try that jump move maybe 10, 12 times or something like that, and then I was just cooked in that specific way. And it pays to spend more time on the other parts of the problem and make sure that you have them as dialed as you think you do. Maybe do links, but also go do something else that day. Go climb a new boulder. Go try, and when I lived in Bend, I would do a lot of warming up on my board, going out and trying a really hard move on a project and then coming back and having a board session or coming back and doing some weightlifting. And that was really valuable for me. Is it as fulfilling as the idea of just trying your project for 4 hours and not getting tired? No. But the only way to build capacity to try something for longer is to try it until you're getting a little bit tired and then walk away from it. If you try it until you're cooked or you try it until you're pissing something off, then you're actually going to decrease your capacity because you're going to get, tendonitis in the elbow on that arm or something. And that's kind of working backwards, right? So accepting your limitations, I think, is really powerful in terms of both developing better tactics for sending the projects, but also in terms of actually getting the project done. You have to accept your limitations in order to climb it as fast as you possibly can. And climbing it as fast as you possibly can is not a function of just staying there until you're cooked. So I hope that all makes sense. It's a bit of a ramble, but you are experiencing what I think is one of the primary limiting factors with climbing harder boulders, and you're not wrong to think that it's very challenging and frustrating. So good on you for the question. Okay, kind of related question here from Jantina. So I thought these two would pair nicely. So Jantina, definitely listen to that previous answer if you didn't. She asks, common advice is to end climbing sessions when you notice power loss to reduce injury risk and improve adaptation and recovery. How do you identify power loss? I often struggle to know whether I have started to lose power because improvements in coordination, macro and micro beta, and tactics allow me to continue making progress on boulders or moves, despite feeling more fatigued overall late in a climbing session. Also, depending on the type of climbing I'm doing, there can be a big difference between the level of fatigue in my fingers specifically versus the rest of my body. So how does power loss apply to fingers versus bigger muscle groups? Okay, so it's a good question. Like I was saying with Jake, this is one of the key limiting factors with climbing harder stuff. I think the big thing, the big difference here is that when we talk about ending sessions when your power drops, I think that general advice, at least for me, is really about the fingers. And so climbing, I often say, is when it comes to the physiological impacts of the sport, it is an elbow down sport. We're really mostly concerned with all that fine motor control and fine physiology happening in the elbow, forearm, hand, wrist, fingers. And those are the physiological limiting areas for climbing, right? It's a rear-wheel drive sport in the sense that you want to know how to use the rest of your body really well. But the reason that we need to be able to do that is because our elbow down physiology is so constrained and so constraining. So all that is prologue to say, don't worry too much about experiencing power loss in the other parts of your body. I think even if your arm, for instance, is getting tired, it's actually okay to go to a different problem and try something else if your fingers still feel fresh. I mean, if your arm is just absolutely cooked and it's like so sore already that it hurts, then maybe it's time to stop the session. But I think it's more of a finger thing that you want to pay attention to. And this is especially important for high power, high speed climbing. So if you're doing climbing that has big foot cutting movements, big dynos, big cordo moves, or if you're doing a lot of board climbing, you want to have a much more sensitive kind of instrument for detecting that power loss. If you're just doing general sort of volume climbing, then it can be a little bit more insidious in the sense that it'll sneak up on you because the moves aren't as powerful. But also you do have a little bit more wiggle room with that type of climbing. Whereas if you're climbing powerful stuff at your limit, you want to be really sensitive and kind of stop early. I really, really like the advice. In fact, I'm sure that I've already said this 10 times on the podcast, but I love the advice of it's better to do 5% too little than it is to do 1% too much. And if you play that out in your head, it just means 1% too much is like something breaks or something gets tendonitis or something hurts and your next session is lower quality. And if you do 5% too little, the cost benefit works way better in your favor. It's like, okay, you don't send one V6 that you were excited about today, but you feel good next time you go to the gym, so you can send it next time you go. It's really just not that bad. It's not that big of a deal to do a little bit less. One exception or one other thing I should mention is like almost always this advice goes with power training and like bouldering. When you're training to have higher endurance and higher capacity, it's necessary to let your power come down a little bit. Kind of like I was saying with moderate climbing, it's sort of an expectation that you're going to endure a little bit more power loss, and that's going to be okay. And we actually can't develop capacity in those power ranges unless we go a little bit into power loss. So if you're talking about training for maximum sport climbing, sometimes you have to take a little bit more risk on, because you have to like have an extra go on your project when you're kind of tired, in order to develop the capacity to have those goes, those third goes or fourth goes on your project, in the future. And that's a calculated risk that you want to take really carefully, but it is a reality of sport climbing. But the big thing is, if you're primarily training for sport climbing, you should have less total super powerful training in your week, and so the risk should still be low. So one way that I put this often is thinking about volume and velocity as the primary risks in climbing. So if you are doing a lot of bouldering, your velocity is going to be really high, and you naturally want to bring the volume down. If you're training for sport climbing and trying to get higher endurance, higher capacity, you know that you're going to need your climbing volume to be higher, but also your velocity average, your average velocity of your climbing moves is going to be a little bit lower. So we can assume that volume's okay. The two things basically multiply by each other. So what you want to avoid is trying to increase your capacity and do a shit ton of climbing and also have all that climbing be really high power. That's where you create a lot of risk. I hope that makes sense between that answer and the stuff that I said to Jake earlier. Thanks for the question. Okay, Joe asks, sorry if this has been asked before, but how does one manage a 40-plus hour a week physically strenuous job with training and performance? Simply getting 9 hours sleep and eating enough doesn't seem to be cutting it. Early 30s for context. Yeah, it's a tricky one. And it's something that I personally dealt with route setting. I wasn't even a full-time route setter. But when I was in my late 20s, I was setting usually 2 days a week, and then I would go climb hard on the weekends, and it was really just kicking my ass, and I wound up with some pretty gnarly injuries because I was just so overtrained in that time. And I wound up stopping route setting, and that was kind of the beginning of like learning what volume management was and how resting really worked for me. And I'm not saying you have to do that, but something's got to give, I think, because past that early sort of folly of youth era, your performance in sport is often a reflection of your lifestyle. So, in people's 20s, I think they can often fall short with like their diet or sleep, or, playing too many video games, or even just more obvious things like drinking. But it doesn't have to be a lack of virtue. It could literally just be that the job that you do is a very physically strenuous job, and you're trying to go out and do a physically strenuous sport. And it's, I think maybe it's obvious, but it's worth saying that like something does have to give there. You're not going to be able to get the most out of both of those things at the same time. Otherwise you'd see a lot more, pro climbers or really, really high level climbers who had those types of jobs. And I can think about examples. I can come up with examples in my mind, like BJ Tilden maybe. But those people are the exception for sure, and not the rule. And this might sound like I'm telling you have to pick one or the other. I'm not doing that. I think that you could keep doing the job you're doing, and you can keep performing at the level that you're performing at, and it's going to be a struggle, and you're probably never going to be fully satisfied. But if you just accept that your performance is going to be kind of limited, then you might still be able to find some satisfaction with that lifestyle. But if you're not happy with it and you want to push a little bit harder, then the thing that has to change. And you don't have to think about it as a constraint. I think being able to pick something and to give more of yourself to it is actually a very empowering idea. And I'll give you an example, because I feel that way about projects in climbing all the time, where I'm so committed to it and I just want to perform better, and I just want to do it and see it through. And I give so much of myself to it, sometimes seasons or years. I mean, I have things I haven't sent that I put 20 or 30 days into. And when I finally stopped trying those things, whether because they just were out of reach, I moved or whatever, or I just literally said, I'm done with this. I can't do it. I'm giving up. It's really hard for a second. And if I'm in the wrong frame of mind, I can sort of feel like it's hard. But the vast majority of the time, I just feel unburdened. I just feel like, oh, look at all these other things that I get to do, because I'm not hung up on this one thing that I wanted. And jobs are a really tricky area for that, because obviously that part of your lifestyle is a huge time investment to find something that works for you, and it's not as easy as just learning to code or whatever they were telling people a few years ago. So I don't have a great suggestion on that front, but it is something that you can change, and it is something that people change all the time. And if climbing and climbing performance is like truly important to you, important enough to subscribe to somebody and ask them a question on Patreon, then I fully believe that it's something that you could change about yourself if you wanted to. And that's probably about the most life coachy that I'll ever get on this podcast. Okay, Matthew asks, thanks for all the thoughtful and actionable advice that you put into the world. It's appreciated. My question relates to performance discrepancies across the onsight Redpoint spectrum of sport climbing. Over the years, it has become obvious to me how much of a better onsight climber I am than Redpoint climber. For me, something about not knowing for sure what is ahead allows me to be present and find flow. As soon as I know the beta, and especially as we get past a few attempts, I struggle to get outside of my head and find the right balance of try hard and flow. My analytical mind has too much time to think about how I'm feeling, conditions, etc., and disrupt the attempt. However, I have several other friends who are the exact opposite. The uncertainty of onsighting takes away flow and try hard, but as soon as they are redpointing, they're dialed in. Do you have any advice for climbers that fall into either of these camps? Cool, great question. I'm coming from the other side of this equation, and actually, I think I've said this before on the podcast, but onsighting feels to me like the last great realm where I have like a lot of ground to cover, which I'm really excited to do someday. But I'll tell you kind of the way that I think about it when I'm coaching other people, and the way that I think about it when I'm looking ahead to that journey of getting better at onsighting, which is getting into flow and staying in flow is a skill. And it's basically the same skill whether or not you have baseline knowledge about the route. What the baseline knowledge should be able to do for you is allow you to operate at a higher percentage of your physical capacity while staying in flow. But that's not a prerequisite, right? So you may have tools and you may have a higher comfort level with being in flow on slightly easier terrain. And when the terrain is a little bit harder and you need more of that baseline knowledge, it's harder for you to use those same tools to stay in flow. But I think it's important to recognize that, because if you feel like you're really good at onsighting, so let's say your Redpoint and onsight grades are like 2 grades apart, or even 1 grade apart for some people, you are starting from a very high skill level with being in flow. It's just that you're situationally not able to apply that skill to the harder climbing. One way to think of it would be like flow and anxiety are basically the opposite, right? Being in true flow is having a total lack of anxiety, a total lack of self-awareness, and not really having anything that's like impeding you from being in a high performance state. The source of that anxiety could be fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Those are the really common ones. That's the problem that most people have with like onsighting and sport climbing. Or it could be, getting in your own way, thinking about the moves too actively, thinking about conditions, thinking about whether or not you're sending. That's a really common one. But the path through all of these things is the same. So my suggestion to you, or my advice, would be to think about your onsighting and think about how it feels and what's happening. And, when you're in a position while you're onsighting where you have let's say you hit a pretty good hold and you have a second to like look up at the next chunk of climbing, you are, while you do that, engaging in a series of physical actions that are helping you stay in flow. There's some things about what you do with your body. There's some things about what you do with your breathing, maybe with your gaze. And those tools are things that you can definitely bring to your redpointing that will still have the same effect on you physiologically if you can put them into that position. So one thing that's been really effective for me when I have been in really good sport shape, it's been quite a few years since I was in really good onsighting shape, but I've been in at least good sport climbing shape lately, and I think it still applies there. I am extremely good at my redpointing with having a breathing practice on the ground and using my breath to get into a good flow state before I start climbing. And that has been just as powerful for me with onsighting. It's just that I don't have the benefit of sitting on the ground for 15 minutes before I try, obviously, with an onsight. I mean, I can do that at the base, but once I'm actually climbing, I can't fall back on that 15 minutes of breathing to get back into flow, right? But I do know that my breathing and my flow are deeply connected. It's a skill that I built up with redpointing, and I can translate it to onsighting if I apply myself to it. So you probably have some similar skills like that. That would be a really valuable starting point. If you feel like getting better at redpointing would improve your satisfaction in your climbing, and you would enjoy doing that. It's not something that you feel like you have to do. It's something that you actually feel like will bring greater satisfaction to your climbing, and it's a challenge that you want to rise to in order to feel fulfilled. Then I think you know what you have to do. You have to get out of your comfort zone, and you have to spend more time trying to Redpoint. So that could be a season, it could be going on a trip, and if you usually would go on like a 1 week sport climbing trip or a 2 week sport climbing trip and just spend all your climbing days like on-sighting easy mileage, that's your comfort zone. So go on a 1 week trip and just put all your eggs in one basket and try to Redpoint a really hard route. That's a super hard thing to do. But if you go into it clear-eyed, trying to get better at the skill of Redpointing instead of trying to send a route, I think it could be very productive. And same thing goes for a season, So like, let's say your hardest Redpoint is, I'll throw out a grade. Let's say your hardest Redpoint is 12C and you can onsight 12A. Like, we both know, sitting here talking on the podcast and listening to it, you could probably climb 12D, right? It's just a question of applying enough time and energy to it. But I think that's the practical thing. That's the sort of big picture practical thing. The boots on the ground, like actual tactical stuff that you have to do is reflecting on what it is that you're doing while you're onsighting that you're not doing while you're Redpointing, and kind of working backwards to fill your climbing days with valuable skills that you can actually work on. All right, folks, that's all the questions for this month. Thanks again. A little bit late this month, so I will be getting more questions in just a couple weeks. And if you want to ask a question for the AMA, or if you want to check out all the other bonus content, you can do that over at patreon.com/innerfireclimbing. Thanks for listening, everybody. See you next month. And I'm not saying you have to do that. Okay, Joe asks, there's the saw again. Cool. Cool, and I can translate it to onsighting if I, starting point. You want to get better at Redpointing. This guy with the saw, driving me crazy. Better at Redpointing. Oh my fucking God. Forcing yourself to do it. Oh my God. What is he cutting? And why is it so long? Is he done? He's not done.